Welcome to the first topic of operational intelligence subject, and in our first topic we'll be looking at the relationship between intelligence and operations, and so having a look at where intelligence fits in a variety of different operational scenarios and settings. So there's a few themes to this presentation, if you will, and they're just here in front of you. We're looking at where the operational level of intelligence fits in, say, amongst the tactical intelligence and strategic intelligence. We'll have a look at how intelligence or operational intelligence often involves supporting operations and also operational planning as well. And also there's a role for it with reviewing operations as well, and so we'll cover a little bit on that. Finally, we'll look at the way that different operational functions require different types of intelligence, and that type of intelligence needs to be able to provide decision makers with that information to make an appropriate decision. And then finally, we'll be looking at the role of operational intelligence and the types of information it uses for a variety of purposes, again linking back to different types of operations and different types of decisions that need to be made. So they're the main themes that we'll be covering in this short presentation. So to begin with, I guess the best thing to do is to look at the way that the different types of levels of intelligence and how those levels of intelligence correspond with each other as well. Now, we know that if we were to look at tactical intelligence, it's very much immediate, it's action-centered, and it involves, I guess, the coordination of actions. Feeding into that is the operational intelligence. Now, operational intelligence involves those coordination of actions. And so it fits in between that and I guess also strategic intelligence. Now, strategic intelligence tends to be that long-term planning, and it looks at that broad horizon sort of approach. And so operational intelligence, therefore, tends to be a bit of a bridge between tactical intelligence and strategic intelligence. And to assist us understanding that, this slide here sort of makes that point, that operational intelligence fits in between these two, and they supply and assist both other forms of intelligence as well. Now, if we were to have a look here at the next slide, we'll have a look at the way that operational intelligence supports operations and operational planning. Now, we know that operational intelligence is a very important part, particularly within the security field, and its role really is in a process of informing and evaluating those operations. So the idea of it is, particularly with pre-operational planning, providing that information that's required to ensure that the plan can be executed in the best possible way. And so it aids decision makers and commanders. It provides that sense of situational awareness and the ability, I guess, to also monitor events as well. And that's where the second point here comes in. During operations, we can see that intelligence can use to monitor those events and react to any changes in those events as well. And finally, we see that operational intelligence has a role in collecting data and evaluating that data to try and get a sense of where does that fit in, or rather, how did that operation particularly work, what was its strengths, what were the shortcomings, and so forth. So as you can see, the operational intelligence level has quite a vast role, and no doubt a very important role as well. Now, within the role of the way that operational intelligence works, we can see that the use of intelligence is framed in these four different ways. We've got here the types of operations being used. So in breaking that down, we see that there are action, investigation, shaping, and monitoring operations. And this is where intelligence comes in to inform those actions. So, informing those actions in regards to particular with action operations. Now, action operations are often most visible, and we'll have a look here at, I think, the next slide. Action ones, as it says, are most visible. They tend to be we see them a lot through national security operations, and they're usually done by policing or military personnel, and they tend to be large scale. Things like a large-scale police raid, some sort of multi-state counter-terrorism raids, things that we saw in, say, 2015. We also see them at work at major events, like G20 summits and so forth, or even we saw it at work at the Lindt Siege Cafe, or Lindt Cafe Siege, that had taken place in Sydney. And so action operation, as its name suggests, is very much about doing things and getting things done. Now, in contrast, or not in contrast, but in difference, maybe contrast, we see investigation. And with investigations, I guess it's a classical type of intelligence and policing where they come together. It's very much a policing type operation. It involves the collecting of information or evidence, and it tends to lead to a prosecution of criminals and so forth. So criminal investigations, I guess, differ from other types in terms of gathering information, in that the information that they gather has to be legally valid evidence. So it becomes a little bit more than just intelligence itself. So where other kinds of investigative operations collect intelligence for purposes, some of them might not actually bear the ability to push for a successful prosecution. So it's important with I guess investigation intelligence that there's a role that intelligence also needs to be seen as legal evidence as well. Now we'll have a look at the next one, which is shaping operations. Shaping operations is an interesting one. The idea of this is to influence or disrupt a target of some kind. It usually involves looking at an organisation, and often it's done in a way that tends to try and prevent or restrict activity, undesirable activity. And the idea of this is it tends to involve liaisoning with communities, or even restricting communication between individuals, or redirecting and transfer of goods or money or so forth. In some ways you can see this in the 1960s FBI and their monitoring of radical groups, and the way that they would often try and shape those groups' behaviours in order to reduce any threat to perceived national security. So shaping becomes an interesting form of operation. Now the next one I want to show you and highlight is the monitoring operation. Now the monitoring operation tends to target critical information. Now this might be looking for things that might indicate a change in circumstances. They often tend to be used in terms of early warnings, so finding out what may be coming, what might be happening. It's typically a report, and it looks at monitoring, I guess, of certain operations. So, for example, you may be collecting information regarding a person of interest or a particular location, and report any changes in circumstances that might indicate criminality of that person or that group. So, for example, you might see breaches of control orders or anti-association laws, and they become part of a monitoring operation. In terms of international monitoring operations, you might track the spread of diseases even, looking at across borders, or you may look at the volume of weapons being transported across borders or other materials, and seeing the capabilities, I guess, that are being produced in particular countries. So you're keeping an eye on things. Essentially, you're keeping an eye on things. So they're the type of operations that exist, And with those operations, obviously, is intelligence. And so we can see here the way that, I guess, each of those different operational functions that we spoke about obviously are going to require different types of intelligence, and obviously different types of decisions will need to be made. So we need to consider, I guess, when providing intelligence, we need to have a really good understanding of what our client requires, what the operational commander may require, so we can provide them with the best intelligence product, report, advice that we can. And so it requires a real understanding of the requirements and a real understanding of those questions that need to be asked. So if you think about the intelligence cycle, the first one of assigning a task, providing those questions, what are the questions that need to be answered? And so it's at that level that we need to have a clear understanding of what is required. So then we can choose where we go to find our information and our intelligence. So specifying the types of collection can only come about effectively when we know exactly what it is that we want and what question or hypothesis are we wanting to look at and answer. So in terms of dealing with different operational functions, you need to be aware of what is the function of that particular operation. What are they trying to do? What's the achievement? What are they trying to achieve? What's the outcome of that? What are the concerns of it? And you're providing information that can direct that. And so the operational intelligence role here is to provide that information based on a really good understanding of what these various operations are seeking. So it's really important to understand the operation question so you can provide the relevant information. Now, if we have a look here at the next slide, I want to talk a little bit now about the different types of information that you come across and you may be using at an operational intelligence level. First of all, we have what's known as raw information. And as it sounds, raw information is data that's not processed. It's not analysed. It really is what it is. And so, as I've got here on the slides, some examples might be a satellite image or some sort of first-hand reports. Now, raw information, obviously, in a perfect world, you could have time to test it. But in some situations you don't, particularly in tactical situations. So it can be helpful in making a rapid choice or an assessment of what's taking on. The next type of information that you'd be probably dealing with is what they call process data. Now, process data has some form of organisation to it. It could be put into a spreadsheet, it could be sorted in some particular way. And so the information is presented consistently, and they've taken out bits of information that aren't required, and provides a good snapshot of what's taking place, or an overview of current trends and so forth taking place. But it's different, and it's different from analysed information. Now, analysed information is not just data, okay? It's information that's been placed into context. So it's been placed into the context of the operation, in our case, and it's been subjected to judgments. Its validity has been checked. Its reliability and consistency has been checked with other information as well. So it's a lot, I suppose safer, might not be a great word, but it's a lot safer, it's a lot likely to be more reliable than we would expect, say, with raw information. Now, evidence. Now, I spoke a little bit before about the way that evidence is gathered. Intelligence for criminal prosecution and so forth is different. And for us, the evidence has to be obviously judicially acceptable, and it meets legal requirements, so it can be admitted into court. So it's a different type of information that we're gathering. And finally, the intelligence product. As an intelligence, working in operational intelligence, you may find yourself being given an existing report, and this is where intelligence product comes in. So whilst you're gathering information for a particular operation, there may be similar reports or previous reports that have been generated. It's got analysis and so forth, and they would then feed in to your own information gathering. Now we know that with intelligence products, particularly the reports and so forth, they're always going to be shaped to meet the client's interests. So they're always going to be tempted and have a particular lens or a perspective put on it. But they are often well digested, they're well analysed, and they've been checked and so forth, and they are used to assist with other intelligence information. So they're basically the different types of information you would be coming across. Now, what we've done here is I've given you a brief overview of some of the key things that I want you to consider in this topic. I've now put up here some study activities. Now, these aren't accessible. These are a way, I guess, to guide your reading. Now, on the Interact site, I'll have a list of suggested readings to accompany this topic. But what I would do if I were you is have a go at doing some of these questions, see what you can remember, see what you can put together without looking at things. And I would encourage you to read the text, chapter 2, looking at that, and begin your reading with that chapter to begin with, and then work through the rest of the readings and resources that we've supplied for you on the Interact page. So hopefully this will give you a broad beginning to looking at the role of intelligence and operations. And of course, if you have any questions or need anything clarified, please don't hesitate to call me.